The ancient church bells of Sandringham rang out across the Norfolk countryside on a crisp January morning, their familiar chimes carrying a secret that would soon send shockwaves through the British press and royal watchers worldwide. Hidden beneath layers of winter coats and scarves, a figure many thought they might never see again in public was quietly making his way toward the centuries-old St. Mary Magdalene Church. For months, speculation had swirled like autumn leaves around Buckingham Palace. Whispered conversations in London drawing rooms, hurried phone calls between royal correspondents, and endless debates on social media had all centered on one burning question: when would King Charles III make his return to public royal duties? The answer came not with fanfare or official announcements, but, in the most quintessentially British way possible, a quiet Sunday morning church service in the heart of the Norfolk countryside, where generations of royals had sought solace, tradition, and a moment of peace away from the relentless gaze of the world. What unfolded that morning would become more than just a royal appearance. It would mark a turning point, a moment of hope, and a powerful reminder of the enduring strength of both family bonds and centuries-old traditions that have weathered far greater storms than any one individual could face. The morning air at Sandringham Estate carried the familiar scent of Norfolk winter, crisp, clean, and touched with the earthy aroma of countryside that had remained unchanged for centuries. As dawn broke across the 20,000-acre royal retreat, a sense of anticipation seemed to hang in the air, though none of the estate workers going about their early morning routines could have predicted what this particular Sunday would bring. King Charles III stood at the window of his private quarters, gazing out across the grounds he had known since childhood. The bare branches of ancient oak trees stretched against the pale winter sky, their shadows dancing across manicured lawns that had witnessed decades of royal gatherings, celebrations, and quiet family moments. This place had always been special to him, a sanctuary where the weight of the crown felt somehow lighter, where memories of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, seemed closest. The decision to attend the morning church service had not been made lightly. For weeks, his private secretary had carefully outlined the considerations, the security arrangements, the potential media attention. But Charles had been resolute. There comes a time, he had told his closest advisors, when duty calls not for grand gestures or elaborate ceremonies, but for the simple act of showing up, of being present when people need to see that continuity endures. In the distance, the spire of St. Mary Magdalene Church rose against the morning sky, a beacon that had called generations of his family to worship. His grandmother, the Queen Mother, had walked this same path countless times. His mother had found solace within those ancient walls during some of her most challenging moments as monarch. Now, it was his turn to continue that tradition, to demonstrate that even in times of uncertainty, some things remained constant. The church itself was a masterpiece of Norfolk flint construction, its walls having stood since the 16th century. The building had witnessed royal christenings, confirmations, and memorial services. It had seen moments of great joy and profound sorrow. The wooden pews, worn smooth by generations of worshippers, had accommodated everyone from farm workers to foreign dignitaries. This morning, they would welcome a king making what many would later describe as one of the most significant public appearances of his early reign. Security preparations had begun before sunrise, though they were designed to be as unobtrusive as possible. The king's protection officers understood the delicate balance required, ensuring absolute safety while preserving the intimate, family atmosphere that made Sandringham church services so meaningful to the royal family. Local Norfolk police had cordoned off key access roads, but in a way that seemed natural rather than oppressive. The goal was to maintain the peaceful, contemplative environment that had always characterized these services. The church's rector, who had served the parish for over a decade, had been informed of the special attendance only days before. The news had filled him with both honor and nervous energy. He had conducted services for various members of the royal family before, but this felt different, more significant somehow. He spent extra time preparing his sermon, choosing hymns that would resonate with themes of hope, perseverance, and community strength. Inside the royal household at Sandringham, staff members went about their duties with the quiet efficiency that had made the estate function smoothly for generations. The king's valet carefully prepared his morning attire, selecting clothing that would be appropriate for the cold Norfolk weather while maintaining the dignity expected of a monarch. Every detail, from the choice of overcoat to the selection of gloves, was considered with the understanding that this appearance would be scrutinized by royal watchers around the world. As the morning progressed, members of the royal family who would be joining the king for the service made their own preparations. Each understood the significance of this moment, the statement it would make about unity, tradition, and the enduring nature of the monarchy. They dressed with care, knowing that their presence would add weight to the king's decision to appear publicly, demonstrating family solidarity during a time when such demonstrations mattered more than usual. The estate's grounds team had worked through the early morning hours to ensure that the pathways to the church were clear and safe. They removed any ice that might have formed overnight, checked that the church grounds were pristine, and made sure that the traditional walking route from the estate to the church was in perfect condition. These men and women, many of whom had worked at Sandringham for decades, understood that they were part of something larger than themselves, custodians of traditions that stretched back centuries. Local residents of the Sandringham area had long grown accustomed to royal visits, but word of this particular service had spread quietly through the community. There was something special about this appearance, something that felt more significant than the routine family gatherings that typically brought the royals to their local church. Longtime residents remembered other momentous occasions when the royal family had gathered at St. Mary Magdalene during times of national or personal significance. The church wardens arrived early to make final preparations, ensuring that the heating system was functioning properly against the January cold, that the hymn books were properly arranged, and that the altar flowers were fresh and beautiful. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had prepared for royal visits many times before, yet with an extra attention to detail that reflected their understanding of this service's importance. As the appointed hour approached, a small but dedicated group of royal watchers and local residents began to gather along the traditional route from Sandringham House to the church. These were not the massive crowds that typically assembled for major royal events in London, but rather an intimate gathering of people who felt connected to this moment in a personal way. Many had followed the royal family's activities for decades, understanding the subtle significance of appearances and absences, of traditions maintained and new precedents set. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the estate grounds and illuminating the church spire that would soon welcome a gathering unlike any other in recent memory. Inside Sandringham House, final preparations were being completed. Private secretaries reviewed security arrangements one last time, household staff made sure that everything was in perfect order, and the royal family members prepared to make their way to a service that would be remembered long after the last hymn was sung. The stage was set for a moment that would demonstrate the enduring power of tradition, the strength of family bonds, and the quiet dignity that had always characterized the British monarchy at its best. As the clock moved toward service time, everyone involved understood that they were about to witness something special, a moment when personal courage and public duty would come together in the most traditional and meaningful way possible. The ancient bells of St. Mary Magdalene would soon ring out across Norfolk, calling the faithful to worship and announcing to the world that some traditions, some commitments, and some demonstrations of strength transcend whatever challenges life might present. The royal surprise that was about to unfold would touch hearts far beyond the borders of this quiet Norfolk parish, reminding people everywhere of the power of showing up, of being present, and of honoring the bonds that connect us all. The first sign that this would be no ordinary Sunday service came when the familiar black vehicles began their careful procession down the tree-lined drive from Sandringham House toward the church. Estate workers paused in their morning duties, offering respectful nods as the motorcade passed. The cars moved slowly, deliberately, allowing glimpses of the royal passengers within while maintaining the dignity appropriate for their journey to worship. King Charles III sat in the lead vehicle, his expression calm and thoughtful as familiar landscapes passed by his window. Every tree, every building, every bend in the road held memories from decades of visits to this beloved family retreat. He had walked this route countless times as a young prince, often alongside his grandmother, who had taught him to appreciate the simple pleasure of attending service in a parish church where everyone was welcomed as part of a larger community. The king's decision to make this public appearance had been deeply personal, born from a desire to demonstrate that leadership sometimes requires showing up even when circumstances are challenging. He understood that his presence at this service would send a message far beyond the walls of the small Norfolk church, a message about continuity, faith, and the enduring nature of institutions that have weathered centuries of change. Behind him, other members of the royal family settled into their vehicles for the short journey. Each had their own relationship with Sandringham and its church, their own memories of services attended here during both joyful celebrations and difficult times. The Queen Consort, Camilla, had grown to love these intimate Norfolk gatherings, appreciating how they allowed the family to worship together away from the formal grandeur of Westminster Abbey or St. George's Chapel at Windsor. The vehicles moved past the estate's famous gardens, now dormant in winter but still beautiful in their structured formality. Gardeners had worked here for generations, maintaining the grounds that provided such pleasure to royal visitors. Some of these men and women had served the royal family for decades, becoming familiar faces who represented the continuity that made Sandringham feel like a true family home rather than just another royal residence. As the procession approached the church, early arrivals among the local congregation could see the distinctive vehicles through the bare winter trees. A quiet excitement rippled through the small gathering of people who had come to witness this moment. These were not tourists or casual observers, but members of the local community who understood the significance of what they were about to experience. The church bells began their call to worship, their ancient bronze voices carrying across the Norfolk countryside with a resonance that spoke of centuries of faith and tradition. The bell ringers, volunteers from the local community who had maintained this tradition for generations, pulled their ropes with special care this morning, understanding that their music would welcome not just their regular congregation, but a monarch seeking solace and strength in familiar rituals. Inside the church, final preparations were being completed by volunteers who had arrived early to ensure everything was perfect. The altar guild members had arranged flowers with particular attention to beauty and symbolism, choosing blooms that would honor the season while creating an atmosphere of hope and renewal. The church wardens checked that the heating was adequate for the January cold, that the prayer books were properly arranged, and that the collection plates were clean and ready. The rector stood in the vestry, making final preparations for a service that he knew would be remembered long after this Sunday morning had passed. He had chosen his readings and hymns with special care, selecting passages and music that would speak to themes of perseverance, community, and the strength that comes from faith. His sermon had been crafted to offer comfort and inspiration without being overtly political or personal, maintaining the pastoral tone that made these parish services so meaningful to the royal family. Outside the church, protection officers took their positions with the practiced efficiency that marked all royal security operations. Their presence was noticeable but not overwhelming, designed to ensure safety while preserving the intimate atmosphere that made Sandringham church services special. Local police officers assisted with crowd control and traffic management, though the gathering remained small and respectful. The first members of the royal party emerged from their vehicles, stepping into the crisp Norfolk air with the practiced grace that comes from decades of public appearances. They moved toward the church entrance along the same path that generations of their family had walked, their footsteps following in those of monarchs and princes who had sought the same peace and spiritual renewal within these ancient walls. King Charles III emerged from his vehicle to a scene of quiet dignity rather than the fanfare that typically accompanied his public appearances. The small crowd of onlookers offered respectful applause, their appreciation genuine and heartfelt. He acknowledged their presence with the gracious nods and smiles that had characterized his public interactions throughout his life, but there was something different about his demeanor this morning, something more personal and intimate than usual. The king paused for a moment at the church entrance, looking up at the ancient stonework that had weathered centuries of Norfolk weather. This building had welcomed his family during moments of great joy and profound sorrow, had provided a constant presence through decades of change and challenge. Today, it would offer him the same comfort and strength it had provided to countless generations before him. As the royal family gathered at the church entrance, their unity was evident in both their physical presence together and their shared understanding of this moment's significance. They had come not as monarchs and princes, but as a family seeking spiritual comfort and demonstrating their commitment to traditions that had sustained them through difficult times. Their presence together spoke volumes about the bonds that held them close, even when facing public scrutiny and personal challenges. The church doors stood open, welcoming them into a space that represented everything they valued about their connection to the British people. Here, in this simple parish church, they could worship alongside local residents, estate workers, and longtime neighbors. Here, the formal protocols that governed most of their public life could be relaxed in favor of the authentic spiritual experience that had always been central to royal family life. Local residents who had known the royal family for years offered warm greetings, their familiarity creating an atmosphere of genuine community rather than formal ceremony. Estate workers who served the family throughout the year stood respectfully nearby, their presence a reminder of the many people whose lives were touched by the royal family's commitment to their Norfolk retreat. The moment had arrived when the royal family would enter the church together, taking their seats among a congregation that included everyone from farm workers to retired professionals, from young families to elderly parishioners who remembered when the current king was still a young prince. This gathering represented the best of British community life, where social distinctions mattered less than shared values and mutual respect. As King Charles III prepared to enter St. Mary Magdalene Church for what would become one of the most meaningful services of his reign, he carried with him the hopes and prayers of people far beyond this Norfolk parish. His decision to appear publicly, to continue traditions that stretched back centuries, would resonate with millions who understood that true leadership sometimes requires nothing more complicated than showing up when people need to see that some things endure, that some commitments transcend temporary difficulties, and that some traditions remain strong enough to weather any storm. The church doors beckoned, promising the peace and renewal that had drawn his family to this sacred space for generations. Inside, ancient wood and stone waited to embrace a congregation gathered in faith, hope, and the enduring belief that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead with dignity, grace, and unwavering commitment to the values that had sustained them through centuries of change. The heavy oak doors of St. Mary Magdalene Church swung open to reveal the warm, golden interior that had provided sanctuary to the royal family for decades. King Charles III stepped across the threshold, his footsteps echoing softly on the ancient stone floors that had been worn smooth by centuries of worshippers. The familiar scent of old wood, polish, and winter flowers enveloped him as he entered the sacred space that held so many precious family memories. The church interior, bathed in gentle light filtering through stained glass windows, presented a scene of timeless beauty. Wooden pews, each one bearing the patina of age and use, stretched toward an altar that had witnessed countless moments of worship, celebration, and quiet reflection. The royal family's usual seats, near the front but not ostentatiously separated from the rest of the congregation, waited empty, ready to receive them as part of a community rather than as distant figures of state ceremony. As the royal party moved down the center aisle, the existing congregation rose in respectful acknowledgement. These were not the crowds of thousands that typically greeted royal appearances, but rather a gathering of perhaps 60 people who represented the heart of rural England. Farm workers stood beside retired teachers, estate managers next to local shopkeepers, young families alongside elderly residents who had attended this church for most of their lives. Their faces reflected genuine warmth and appreciation for the king's presence among them. The queen consort, Camilla, followed the king with the graceful composure that had characterized her public appearances for years. She nodded to familiar faces among the congregation, people she had come to know through previous visits to Sandringham. Her presence added a dimension of continuity and stability, demonstrating the strength of the royal family's commitment to maintaining their connection with local communities even during challenging times. Other senior royals took their places with quiet dignity, each understanding their role in this moment of family solidarity. Their presence together sent a powerful message about unity and mutual support, showing the world that the royal family remained strong and committed to their duties despite whatever personal or political challenges they might be facing. Their shared attendance at this service represented a public affirmation of their bonds with each other and their dedication to the institutions they represented. The church organist, a local volunteer who had provided music for royal services many times over the years, began the opening hymn with a performance that was both technically excellent and deeply heartfelt. The ancient pipe organ, maintained by generations of craftsmen, filled the church with music that seemed to rise from the very stones of the building itself. The congregation joined in with voices that had sung these same hymns countless times before, creating a harmony that transcended social distinctions and united everyone present in shared worship. King Charles III's voice could be heard among the others, singing with the genuine enthusiasm that had always marked his participation in religious services. His love of traditional Anglican music was well known, and his presence in the church choir of voices seemed to energize the entire congregation. The hymn selection included traditional favorites that had been sung in this church for generations, their familiar melodies providing comfort and continuity in a world that often seemed to change too rapidly. The rector approached the lectern to begin the service with prayers that had been carefully chosen to reflect themes of hope, perseverance, and community strength. His words were directed not just to the royal family, but to everyone present, acknowledging the challenges that all people face while affirming the faith that sustains communities through difficult times. The prayers included petitions for wisdom for leaders, comfort for those facing trials, and gratitude for the blessings of community and tradition. As the service progressed through its familiar liturgy, the presence of the royal family seemed to enhance rather than overshadow the spiritual atmosphere. They participated fully in the responses, the hymns, and the prayers, demonstrating the sincere faith that had always been central to their understanding of their roles and responsibilities. Their authentic participation reminded everyone present that beneath the titles and ceremonial duties lay people of genuine spiritual conviction. The Bible readings, selected weeks in advance but seeming particularly appropriate for this gathering, spoke of perseverance through trials, the importance of community support, and the strength that comes from faith during uncertain times. The lay reader, a longtime parishioner who had been honored with this responsibility, delivered the passages with clarity and conviction, understanding the special significance they would hold for this particular congregation. During the period set aside for quiet prayer and reflection, a profound sense of peace settled over the church. King Charles III bowed his head in prayer alongside farm workers and retirees, demonstrating the democratic nature of spiritual life where earthly distinctions matter less than the common human need for guidance, comfort, and strength. The silence was filled with the unspoken prayers of people from all walks of life, united in their desire for wisdom and peace. The sermon that followed was masterfully crafted to speak to universal themes without being specifically directed at any individual present. The rector spoke about the importance of showing up during difficult times, of maintaining traditions that provide stability and comfort, and of finding strength in community relationships that transcend temporary challenges. His words resonated with everyone present, from the king seeking to fulfill his duties despite personal trials to the elderly parishioners facing health challenges with courage and dignity. Local children, attending with their families, watched the proceedings with wide-eyed fascination. For them, this service would become a lifelong memory, a moment when they witnessed history being made in their own parish church. Their presence added a dimension of hope and continuity to the gathering, representing the future generations who would inherit the traditions being demonstrated and celebrated this morning. The offering, collected in the same simple baskets used every Sunday, proceeded with the same quiet dignity that marked all aspects of the service. The royal family participated fully, their contributions joining those of local residents in supporting the church's ongoing ministry to the community. This simple act of giving together reinforced the message that they were all part of the same spiritual community, regardless of their worldly circumstances. As the service moved toward communion, the atmosphere became even more intimate and meaningful. King Charles III and his family joined the line of communicants with the same humility shown by every other member of the congregation. This ancient ritual, performed in countless churches around the world every Sunday, took on special significance as it united people from vastly different backgrounds in a common act of faith and spiritual nourishment. The communion rail, worn smooth by generations of kneeling worshippers, welcomed everyone equally. Estate workers knelt beside royalty, elderly parishioners next to young families, longtime residents alongside visitors. The simple bread and wine, blessed and shared according to traditions stretching back centuries, provided spiritual sustenance to everyone present while reinforcing the fundamental equality that marks authentic Christian community. The final hymn, a traditional favorite known by heart by most of the congregation, filled the church with music that seemed to embody the joy and gratitude felt by everyone present. Voices joined in harmony that transcended social distinctions, creating a moment of pure community celebration that would be remembered long after the last notes faded away. King Charles III sang with evident pleasure, his face reflecting the peace and renewal that this service had provided. As the service concluded with the traditional blessing, the rector's words seemed to encompass not just those present in the church, but all those around the world who had been touched by this demonstration of faith, continuity, and royal commitment to service. The blessing sent everyone forth with renewed strength and purpose, equipped to face whatever challenges awaited them beyond the church doors with the confidence that comes from shared faith and mutual support. As the final notes of the closing hymn faded into the ancient rafters of St. Mary Magdalene Church, a gentle stillness settled over the congregation. King Charles III remained in his pew for a moment longer than protocol might typically require, his eyes closed in what appeared to be a final prayer of gratitude. The expression on his face spoke of genuine spiritual refreshment, the kind of renewal that comes only from authentic worship shared with a caring community. The congregation began to file out slowly, each person understanding that they had participated in something extraordinary. Local residents who had worshipped in this church for decades recognized that this service would become part of the church's history, a story that would be told for generations to come. Children who had watched the proceedings with fascination would grow up with memories of the morning when their king joined them in their little Norfolk church, demonstrating that faith and community transcend all earthly distinctions. Outside the church, the January air seemed crisp and invigorating after the warm intimacy of the service. King Charles III emerged into the winter sunlight with a visible sense of peace and satisfaction, his demeanor noticeably more relaxed than when he had arrived. He paused to speak with the rector, expressing genuine appreciation for the service and the warm welcome extended by the parish community. Their conversation, though brief, reflected the mutual respect and understanding that had always characterized the royal family's relationship with their Norfolk neighbors. The small crowd that had gathered to witness the king's arrival had grown slightly during the service, as word spread quietly through the local community. These newcomers maintained the same respectful distance and dignified behavior that had marked the earlier gathering, understanding intuitively that this was a moment for quiet appreciation rather than enthusiastic demonstration. Their presence added to the sense of community celebration without overwhelming the intimate atmosphere that made this appearance so special. Members of the royal family took time to greet longtime residents and estate workers who had served them faithfully over the years. These conversations, though necessarily brief, carried genuine warmth and familiarity. The Queen Consort, Camilla, stopped to speak with several local women who had become familiar faces during her years of visiting Sandringham, inquiring about their families and expressing interest in their lives beyond their connection to the royal household. Local photographers, mainly from regional newspapers and magazines, captured images that would soon appear in publications around the world. Their pictures would tell the story of this morning better than any written account could, showing the genuine joy on faces throughout the crowd, the relaxed demeanor of the royal family, and the authentic community atmosphere that had made this service so meaningful. These photographs would become historical documents, preserving a moment that demonstrated the enduring strength of British traditions and values. The church rector found himself surrounded by parishioners eager to share their thoughts about the service and express their appreciation for the honor of hosting the royal family. His own sense of fulfillment was evident as he spoke about the privilege of conducting such a meaningful service, one that had allowed him to minister to his entire congregation while demonstrating the universal nature of spiritual need and comfort. The morning had validated his years of faithful service to this rural parish and reminded him of why he had chosen the ministry as his life's work. Estate workers who had been granted permission to attend the service stood in small groups, discussing what they had witnessed and expressing pride in their connection to events that would be remembered far beyond the borders of Norfolk. Many of these men and women had served the royal family for years, but this morning had given them a new appreciation for the genuine faith and humility that motivated their employers. Their respect and affection for the royal family had been deepened by witnessing their authentic participation in worship. As the royal family prepared to return to Sandringham House, King Charles III took a moment to walk among the gathered crowd, speaking briefly with individuals who had waited patiently for this opportunity. His conversations were personal and genuine, reflecting his long-held belief that the monarchy's strength comes from its connection with ordinary people who formed the backbone of British society. Each person he spoke with would carry away a personal memory of kindness and attention from their king. The vehicles that would return the royal party to the main house waited quietly, their drivers understanding that this departure should be unhurried, allowing time for the natural conclusion of conversations and expressions of mutual appreciation. The security personnel maintained their vigilant watch while staying as unobtrusive as possible, recognizing that their role was to protect rather than to dominate the atmosphere of community celebration that had developed. Inside the church, volunteers began the quiet work of returning everything to its normal Sunday condition. The flower arrangements that had graced the altar would remain for the week, serving as a reminder to regular parishioners of the special service they had hosted. The hymn books were returned to their proper places, the chairs rearranged as needed, and the church prepared for its next service. Yet the building itself seemed to hold an echo of the morning's significance, a sense that something important had occurred within its ancient walls. The bell ringers, who had provided such beautiful music before and after the service, gathered in the tower to discuss their performance and express satisfaction at their contribution to such a memorable occasion. Their bronze voices had called the community to worship and would continue to do so for generations to come, carrying forward traditions that connected past, present, and future in an unbroken chain of faith and service. local media representatives prepared to file stories that would soon reach audiences around the world. Their reports would focus not on sensational details or political implications, but on the genuine human interest of a monarch seeking spiritual comfort and finding it in the embrace of a caring community. The story they would tell was one of faith, tradition, and the enduring power of simple human connections that transcend social boundaries. As King Charles III finally entered his vehicle for the return journey to Sandringham House, he carried with him more than just memories of a beautiful service. He had received the spiritual renewal he sought, but, more importantly, he had demonstrated to himself and to the world that leadership sometimes requires nothing more than showing up authentically, participating genuinely, and allowing oneself to be part of something larger than individual concerns or challenges. The drive back to the main house passed through grounds that now seemed somehow more peaceful and welcoming than they had in the early morning hours. The ancient trees, the manicured lawns, and the familiar buildings all appeared touched by the grace and contentment that flows from meaningful worship and genuine community connection. The estate itself seemed to reflect the satisfaction and renewal that had been gained from this simple but profound Sunday morning experience. Behind them, the church spire continued to point toward heaven, a constant reminder of the eternal values that had sustained the royal family and the British people through centuries of change and challenge. The building would remain as a testament to faith and tradition, ready to welcome future generations of worshippers seeking the same comfort and strength that had been found within its walls this morning. The congregation slowly dispersed to their homes throughout the Norfolk countryside, each person carrying away personal memories of a morning that had enriched their understanding of community, faith, and the bonds that connect all people regardless of their earthly status. They had witnessed something beautiful and meaningful, something that reinforced their faith and traditions and values that continue to provide stability and hope in an uncertain world. The news of King Charles III's surprise appearance at Sandringham's Sunday service spread across the globe with remarkable speed, carried by social media, news websites, and traditional broadcasting networks that recognized the significance of this quiet but powerful moment. Within hours, images of the king emerging from St. Mary Magdalene Church had been seen by millions of people who understood that they were witnessing something more profound than a routine royal appearance. Back at Sandringham House, the royal family gathered for their traditional Sunday lunch, but the atmosphere carried an additional warmth and satisfaction that came from the morning's successful service. King Charles III appeared noticeably more relaxed and energized than he had in weeks, his participation in the familiar rituals of Anglican worship having provided the spiritual refreshment he had sought. The conversation around the dining table reflected not just relief at a public appearance well received, but genuine gratitude for the opportunity to worship among people they had come to know and respect over many years. The Queen Consort, Camilla, spoke with evident pleasure about the warmth they had received from the congregation, particularly from longtime residents who had become familiar faces during their years of visiting the Norfolk estate. Her observations about individual parishioners they had encountered revealed the genuine personal connections that had developed over time, relationships that transcended the formal protocols that typically governed royal interactions with the public. Other members of the royal family shared their own reflections on the morning's experience, each finding different aspects of the service particularly meaningful. Some spoke about the beauty of the ancient church setting, others about the genuine warmth of the local community, and still others about the comfort that came from participating in traditions that had sustained their family through generations of both triumph and adversity. Their shared appreciation for what they had experienced reinforced the bonds that held them together as a family. Meanwhile, throughout Britain and across the Commonwealth, people who had heard about the King's church appearance found themselves moved by what it represented. For many, this simple act of public worship demonstrated qualities they most valued in their monarchy: authenticity, humility, and commitment to traditions that provided stability and continuity in a rapidly changing world. Social media platforms filled with positive comments from people who saw this appearance as exactly the kind of leadership they hoped to see from their king. The rector of St. Mary Magdalene found his telephone ringing throughout the afternoon with calls from media representatives, church officials, and friends who had heard about the morning service. His responses to these inquiries consistently emphasized the genuine spiritual nature of the king's participation and the authentic warmth that had characterized the entire gathering. He spoke about the privilege of providing pastoral care to everyone in his congregation, regardless of their worldly status, and about the joy of seeing faith transcend social boundaries. Local residents who had attended the service began receiving calls from friends and relatives around the world who had seen news coverage of the event. These conversations allowed them to share personal observations about the royal family's genuine participation in worship and their authentic interactions with community members. Many spoke about feeling honored to be part of something that had clearly meant so much to the king and his family, while others emphasized how natural and unforced the entire experience had felt. Estate workers at Sandringham went about their afternoon duties with an additional sense of pride and purpose, knowing that they had played supporting roles in an event that would be remembered far beyond their Norfolk community. Gardeners, housekeepers, security personnel, and maintenance staff all understood that their faithful service had contributed to creating an environment where such meaningful moments could occur naturally and authentically. The church building itself seemed to hold an echo of the morning's significance as afternoon visitors came to see where history had been made. The ancient stones, the wooden pews, and the stained glass windows that had witnessed the service now became objects of interest for people wanting to connect with the location where their king had found spiritual comfort and renewal. These visitors approached the building with the reverence appropriate for a sacred space that had just hosted something truly special. International media coverage of the event consistently focused on the positive aspects of what had occurred, with commentators noting the king's healthy appearance, the obvious pleasure he had taken in the service, and the genuine warmth of his interactions with local residents. The coverage emphasized themes of tradition, community, and the enduring strength of institutions that had weathered centuries of change while maintaining their essential character and purpose. Royal biographers and historians began placing the morning's events in broader context, noting how this appearance continued a long tradition of British monarchs finding strength and renewal through faith and community connections. They pointed to similar moments in the reigns of previous kings and queens, demonstrating how the monarchy's relationship with the Church of England had provided both spiritual sustenance and public connection throughout the institution's long history. The photographs taken during and after the service became some of the most widely distributed royal images of the year, not because of any dramatic content, but precisely because they captured genuine moments of joy, peace, and community connection. These pictures showed King Charles III not in ceremonial regalia or formal settings, but as a man of faith finding comfort in traditions and relationships that had sustained his family for generations. As evening approached at Sandringham, the royal family reflected on a day that had exceeded their hopes in every way. What had begun as a simple desire to attend Sunday service had become a powerful demonstration of the monarchy's continued relevance and the enduring strength of the bonds that connect the royal family with the people they serve. The king's decision to appear publicly, despite whatever personal concerns he might have had proven to be exactly the right choice at exactly the right time. The success of this appearance would influence future royal engagements, demonstrating the power of authentic moments over elaborate ceremonies, of genuine interaction over formal protocol, and of traditional values over modern spectacle. It had shown that the monarchy's greatest strength lay not in its grandeur but in its ability to connect with fundamental human needs for community, tradition, and spiritual meaning. The day concluded with evening prayers in the private chapel at Sandringham House, where the royal family gathered once again to give thanks for the blessings they had received and experienced. These private moments of worship provided a fitting end to a day that had begun with public service and continued with private reflection, demonstrating the central role that faith played in their understanding of their duties and responsibilities. As night fell across the Norfolk countryside, the spire of St. Mary Magdalene Church stood silhouetted against the winter sky, a permanent reminder of the morning when tradition, faith, and royal duty had come together in perfect harmony. The church would continue to serve its community for generations to come, but this particular Sunday would always hold a special place in its long history, a day when the King of England had found exactly what he needed within its ancient walls. The royal surprise that had unfolded that morning had become something much larger than anyone had anticipated. It had demonstrated the enduring power of simple acts of faith and community, the strength that comes from maintaining traditions that connect past and present, and the profound importance of showing up when people need to see that some things remain constant in an ever-changing world. King Charles III had sought spiritual comfort and found it, but he had also given something precious in return, proof that the bonds connecting the monarchy to the people remain strong, authentic, and capable of providing hope and inspiration for generations yet to come.